Hi, welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. This is our 8th installment of 1 Thessalonians, our study of 1 Thessalonians. And we're now in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. So Paul has been suffering, we've been reading about in the last couple of weeks. He's been hounded by the Jewish and Greek establishments. Neither want his message of Jesus Christ to spread, the good news to spread. Paul's also suffering because he has such a heart for the Thessalonians, yet he can't get back to see them. Recall that his ministry to them had just begun as little as 3 weeks when he was forced to leave them. He can't continue what he started, but he wants to. Paul's suffering, and then so are the Thessalonians. They are facing trials, as Paul calls them, which are a threat to their faith. Paul's concerned that they're feeling abandoned, and he hears reports that their own countrymen, the Greeks, are persecuting them. Probably for the Thessalonians who turned from idols to follow Jesus, this meant loss of jobs, loss of reputations, and being ostracized from their families. Paul can't go, but he has a plan, which the first 3 verses of chapter 3 we looked at. So when we could stand it no longer, we thought it best to be left by ourselves in Athens. We sent Timothy. He was one of the evangelists with Paul, who is our brother and God's fellow worker in spreading the gospel of Christ. Here we go, to strengthen and encourage you in your faith, so that no one would be unsettled by these trials. Paul's concerned that their newfound faith is in jeopardy, so he sends Timothy to strengthen, as in support, and encourage them. But Paul sees a bigger danger, and now we're going to look at verse 5, the second half of verse 5. I was afraid that in some way the tempter might have tempted you, and our efforts might have been useless. What does Satan the tempter hope to gain? That they might lose their faith completely, or at least weaken their faith. Okay. So how would that apply to us today? Here in the U.S., 2022, having our faith is relatively risk-free. Our trials are not of the persecution variety, but trials as in general suffering we can all relate to. This is where we talk about health issues, and loss of loved ones, and broken relationships, and financial issues. So how do we American Christians do with suffering or affliction or hardship or adversity? I'm quoting Philip Yancey, writes about what he terms pain. I have his quote here. I have never read a poem extolling the virtues of pain, nor seen a statue erected in its honor, nor heard a hymn dedicated to it. Pain is usually defined as unpleasantness. Christians don't really know how to interpret pain. If you pin them against the wall in a dark, secret moment, many Christians would probably admit that pain was God's one mistake. God really should have worked a little harder and invented a better way of coping with the world's dangers. So pain, affliction, hardship, suffering, adversity, it's part of life, right? It's part of living. And that's where we get the title today. Pretty soon we're going to see what Paul has to say about that. Although we may not like it, it's best to learn to live with it. And what's Satan's desire? To shake our faith, to where we may even ask things like, does God really care about me anymore? Or do I really believe God can help me? Or how can a good God let this happen? Or I think the ultimate might be, have I been wrong to believe in God all this time? That could be a problem for us today. It was a problem for the Thessalonians, or a concern for Paul, because they were just new at it and they have had a lot of pressure to go back to the old ways. So in our suffering, this is in their suffering, the tempter wins if we or they either trust God less or give up on him, or we got drawn into alternatives. I'll talk more on that in a minute. So, continuing on from last week with the next verses, let's see what happened with Timothy's trip. Did he come back with good news or bad news? Were they worshiping idols? Or Or were they hanging by a thread? Were they feeling abandoned? Let's read verse 6. But Timothy has just now come to us from you and has brought good news about your faith and love. He has told us that you always have pleasant memories of us and that you long to see us, just as we also long to see you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, in all our distress and persecution, we were encouraged about you because of your faith. So yay, they kept the faith. Even though temptation was surely there to go back to the old ways, they kept the faith. Then Paul writes this, and this is the phrase that I've titled this whole thing. It comes from this: for now we really live. So I think I called it really live, or real living, or really live, yes. What's the world say about really living? What comes to mind? We might use the phrase, it's the good life. Whatever money can buy. Maybe it's living in the fast lane, like drink hard and drive fast. Maybe it's the easy life, sitting on the beach in a hammock. Of course, each of these has a no suffering promise, but real life includes suffering, and really living includes the Lord. As Paul says to finish this, for now we really live, since you are standing firm in the Lord. So not just acknowledging the Lord's existence, but standing firm in the Lord. To me, that means trusting in the Lord in spite of suffering. Knowing and trusting that He's got your back. He's got your best interests in mind in whatever the circumstances. He'll see you through and work with you to make you what He intended. So my goal today is not to go into a lengthy discussion on the value of suffering. That was kind of a taste of it. But I'd like us to turn to this wisdom. These are the words of James at the beginning of his letter. So the second verse of chapter 1. Consider or count it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials or external adversities of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance or endurance. Perseverance must finish its work. Another translation, have its perfect result, so that you may be mature and complete. And the word perfect is used there, not lacking anything. So what does James say are the chances of facing a trial? He's saying it 100%, right? It's when you face trials, not if you face trials. Why is a believer to be joyful? Because we know what the testing does. That word testing comes from the Greek word dokimos, meaning approved. The word dokimos is found on the undersides of many ancient pieces of pottery from the Near East. Stuff they've dug up, archaeologists. The mark meant the piece went through the furnace without cracking, so therefore it was approved. So, using that metaphor, our trials are designed by God for good. Our trials give us a chance to be heated by the furnace, not to make us crack, but to solidify us and strengthen us, so that we can get that stamp of approval. So suffering's a given. How we deal with it, our attitude, is what we can control. Solomon, known to be wise, King Solomon, David's son, in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 14, provides us with a good attitude to live by. This is the New International Version's translation of it. When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider, God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, a man cannot discover anything about his future. So we have good times, we have bad times. But I'm not quite sure what he means on that last part. A man cannot discover anything about his future from this translation. So I like the paraphrases of this verse. A couple of paraphrases. These are translations where they make it more modern and they don't necessarily go word for word. So this is one very famous paraphrase translation of the Bible is called The Message. And it says, on a good day, enjoy yourself. On a bad day, examine your conscience. God arranges for both kinds of days so that we won't take anything for granted. Or the New Living Translation, many of us are familiar with that. Enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. Remember that nothing is certain in this life. So, what does Solomon suggest we do? Consider, examine your conscience, realize what? That God's in control. Satan isn't in control, and we aren't in control. God's in control. That is really living. And next week we'll talk. Paul explains what we're really living is like. And we'll get into that next week. In the meantime, take care, and may the Lord be with you.